about the Middle East? I mean, this is on
Mm,
top of mind for many people. So what are your
mm.
views about that?
So I've just been in New York around the events at the General Assembly, the 79th General Assembly High Level Week, as I think a number of people have noticed.
Hmm.
And I spent 9 days there, still recovering from exhaustion, actually, because you go from breakfast to dinners. One of the very first thing I did when I got there was, on behalf of the elders, address the UN Security Council. The elders is called in to brief, partly because the organisation is held in respect, and also because it will tell truth to power. It
Yes.
will remind member states what their obligations are. And the statement I made was based on years of focus by the elders on the Israel-Palestinian
Hmm.
issues. And the substance of the statement was, would the Security Council and member states of the UN, of the General Assembly, actually uphold the resolutions of the Security
Yes.
Council and uphold the international judicial and legal processes, which have come under attack for doing their job.
Yes.
So I specifically referred to the resolution which was passed in December 2016, which the Security Council deemed the settlements to be illegal in the occupied Palestinian territories, now reinforced, of course, by the International Court of Justice advisory opinion deeming the occupation as a whole to be illegal. I also referred to the resolution of June this year, where the Security Council did call for a full, immediate and complete ceasefire. Neither of these resolutions, of course, upheld. And then with respect to the International Court of Justice, it made a number of provisional measures and rulings going back earlier this year in response to the South African case,
Mm-hmm.
not observed the rulings that it made. And then, of course, we have the process underway with the International Criminal Court, where the prosecutor has asked for indictments against named individuals from both Israel and Hamas. And the ICC came under serious attack for even asking for that.
Right.
So our message was respect international law and institutions and processes. Otherwise, we're all doomed.
Yes.
And you often hear New Zealand politicians talking about the international rule of law. Well, unfortunately, just about every state on earth is very selective in how it upholds it. And we need to get in behind our international court, our international criminal court,
Sure.
and the Security Council resolutions, and
Surely.
try to
Yeah.
use them to make a better outcome.
Yeah, just on that, I think surely for a smaller country like New Zealand, we have more interest. We have of these systems working. Of course, bigger countries can try and take exception in certain cases because they have the means to do so. But smaller and medium-sized countries should be great advocates of the system. I listened to that speech, and one thing you said also was talking about the conflict management approach that currently has been used up to date and how that's failed. Can you just sort of, in broad strokes, talk about that approach and what would be a better approach? You talked about a conflict management approach, that term specifically.
Yeah. So the reality is that up until now, and maybe going forward, sadly, the UN processes have had almost no influence on the relations between Israel and the Palestinians, despite resolutions and fine words. The UN has been pushed aside from any attempt at a peace process. It's come from others. Occasionally the US gets busy, but for the most part, I think it's been inclined to stand back and let things rumble on. And then you get a terrible crisis. I mean, how many Gaza wars have there been? This being the most devastating by far, where people say the key issue has to be addressed. And that is that the Palestinians need statehood. And so stop trying to manage conflict at a low level. And
Right,
it's not now at a low level. It's at sort of red peak heat, and start to look for the processes that will lead to resolution. This can't be managed as a conflict. It's out of control. And as we see now, the regional spillover with Hezbollah, Lebanon, Iran, this is catastrophic. And we need serious diplomacy. Now, I do think the Arab states hold a lot of the key to this.
Yes.
The United States, under both recent administrations, has been very keen on these Abrahamic Accords,
Yes.
which would have seen a reconciliation between Arab states and Israel. And let's face it, going back some 40 plus years,
yes,
there was a settlement with Jordan. There was a settlement with Egypt. New Zealand forces are in the Sinai to this day, policing that settlement. In quite recent years, United Arab Emirates has exchanged ambassadors with Israel. But the big prize is Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is hanging tough. And there was an initiative announced at the UN last week between the Saudi foreign minister, Prince Faisal, and the Norwegian foreign minister, where it was quite clear that the Saudis are not going to recognise without that move to Palestinian statehood. So that should really be focusing minds in Washington, D.C., whichever administration is around.
That makes sense. So the approach, the sort of trying to keep things on the boil with a conflict management process, not getting to the nub of the issue, which is effectively resolution.
Yeah, and further to that, I mean, Israel will never enjoy security in a neighborhood where everyone is opposed to it. So it sees itself as somehow exceptional. The truth is, until it gets peace with its neighbors, its people will never know security. As we know, long-range records, missiles, and it's not such long range to come from Lebanon or the Gaza Strip or from Iran. The people of Israel are now living in permanent insecurity, almost a permanent state of war. This is not a future for anybody. And before we even start on the plight of the Palestinians, his position is very, very dire. So something has to cut through this if we're to stop these cycles of wars, misery, killing, injury. It's shocking.
Yes, and I'll just take one last comment on this topic before we move on. And what on the current news from this morning, a very worrying news of sort of 100 plus missiles coming in retaliation from Iran hitting Israel. What do you think are possible escalations, and what should our small country voice be doing in this sort of situation? And what are your thoughts there?
Our small country voice should be for an urgent ceasefire on all scores and steps to be taken towards Palestinian statehood, with a state living side by side with Israel in peace. And there's some quite creative thinking around now about what that could look like. With 700,000 settlers now in the West Bank, is the demand that they all return, or is that there's some kind of right of residence where they don't have citizenship in the Palestinian state but have Israeli citizenship, but you have the two states working quite closely together? That may seem idealistic at the moment, but it's what people on both sides of the line in Palestine and Israel are discussing. But I'm also concerned that a lot of the very one-sided commentary we hear, when Israel kills the senior Palestinian negotiator in Iran, Iran then is told it can't retaliate. When Israel has the pager attack on Lebanon and then takes out the leader of Hezbollah, and I understand also a single Iranian commander, there are then threats issued to Iran that it cannot retaliate or others will retaliate. I mean, can we all just take a step back here? We're in an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. We know what happens if this goes on. Some of the Iranian missiles will get through. More of the residual Hezbollah missiles will get through. More Israeli bombing attacks will kill more people. I mean, this is a catastrophe, and it's on our watch. And I really think our diplomats, the diplomats of every country with a voice, need to be saying enough. This kind of approach cannot continue.
There's that escalation ladder they talk about. And just one comment from me on that. I see that our government has publicly condemns the one side, but not the other. And that's the problem. We have always prided ourselves on having an even-handed approach. And to some extent that has prevailed. For example,
our foreign minister's comments at the UN on this subject, I'd find very little to disagree with.
Yes.
But I think at a level above that, we've seen these statements where our Prime Minister has made statements with Prime Ministers of Canada and Australia, which are well subpar where New Zealand diplomacy has been on these issues. So, it's a very precious thing to keep your reputation for acting on a basis of principle and international law and what's fair. And I think, that there's a danger that we're departing from that. I think, for example, entering into support for the bombing of the Houthis was quite wrong. I've followed Yemeni affairs for many years since I was at UNDP. I've visited the country. I've seen the Houthis withstand years of bombing by the Saudi Arabians and United Arab Emirates. Frankly, a few bombing raids from the US and friends, supported by New Zealand, aren't going to stop the Houthis. What the Houthis want is an end to the conflict in Gaza. Right? So again, we keep coming back to, can we please address the root problems
root cause of it?
And so in a few days, the Americans will go to the ballot and elect a new president. A Trump 2.0 could...
And upcoming at Diplosphere, you'll see these events. We have Trump 2.0 versus Harris 1.0. How should New Zealand prepare? Then the worldly woman of Wellington through the eyes of Australia, India, Turkey, Argentina, and Ireland. Join us at Diplosphere.